Great Wednesday. Welcome to the Healing America's Narratives podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined with my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
Doing well, King. Always good to be with you here on a Wednesday morning.
Same here, same here. And so let's get started. What's your spiritual energy number today?
I'm coming in at a 10. It's I admit that I'm helped by warm weather. We have this is our third day in a row of almost summer-like weather after a really cold winter. So that helps me, but I'm doing work I love and have good energy today.
Excellent. Now, I join you as a 10, and I live in gratitude. And I just feel the need today, just again, anyone who may be new to listening to us, because I say this in every one of my meetings now, and I've gotten lazy over the time and gotten used to just saying what's your spiritual energy number being from 0, life sucks, to 10 being life is awesome, and leaving it at that. And then most people, I realize, are conditioned by the construct to not ever say 10 based off that, because that means they're perfect. And that's what they assume. So they won't ever say 10. So they'll say a 7, right? They give an honest assessment. They'll think about all the things in their life and say a 7. And even though that's fine, but the few times I run into people who said 5s, anything below 6, I'm saying you should end your meeting at that point. If it's a person, it's going to be a little more difficult. You got to pivot to a different conversation. But if it's online, reschedule the meeting because the person's not going to be engaged. They're going to be adversarial. What you're saying is not going to land right because it is not who they are. It's that energy they brought to the meeting right before it started. And that's why the question comes from. So if a person has argued with their wife, got cut off in traffic, direct reports didn't get the document out, all that, then they get on the call with you. They're bringing that energy to the call. And that's why I asked that question, because they're a 5, they're not going to be their best selves. And that's a bad representation. And the meeting won't go the way that you intend. So that's the reason I asked the question. So I appreciate the space for explaining that, but I felt the need to do it because I had to do that because recently I had an in-person meeting with someone who said 5. And I mistakenly forgot my own framework and had the meeting with them anyway. And it didn't go as planned. And I know why. It's because they were not vibrating at the right energy. I'm a 10, they're a 5. We're not going to have co-creation energy in that space. So now with all that being said, Reggie, what's your gratitude for this morning?
Yes, I'm just grateful as always. This is I don't want to say it's rote because even though I repeat it when you ask, it's not really rote. It's thoughtful, and because it's true, it's factual. So I'm just grateful for having indoor plumbing, having safe drinking water, having electricity, which gives me a refrigerator where I can store food, and I have access to mostly fresh food as well. Have a roof over my head, so all of my basic needs are met, and that puts me in the top. I don't know. I'm going to say 5%. It might be 3% of people on the planet, and I don't have a lot of wealth. I don't have a lot of financial wealth, but I have enough to take care of those basic needs, which frees me up to do things that I really care about. So I'm also grateful for my general good health, for a mind that I think is still pretty functional. Even though as I get older, the short-term memory is not as good. But I can, joking aside, I still teach, I write. I'm in conversation with you on Wednesday mornings. I have family and friends that love me and whom I love. And so I'm just grateful for all of that.
Excellent. Gratitude for sharing that. And like you, I wake up each morning and I go through a list and I say my gratitude prayers when I get out of bed. Before my feet hit the ground, actually. And I start with, I'm grateful for my life, my health, my ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have a sound mind. I'm grateful for that 24 hours. I'm grateful for my problems. Because through my problems, there's opportunity for growth. I'm grateful for the people who lift me up in my life. I'm grateful for the ability to continue to learn and be growth-minded and understand technology and have that knowledge and back experience I can grasp technology pretty quickly. And I'm grateful for the infinite possibilities that today is going to provide. And to me, that's the first step with being a 10, is that when you go through your gratitude list, I don't see in my mind how I can actually go through that list and then say, I'm a 5, right? Now, again, regardless of whatever outside circumstances is going to be there, I mean, life is going to be there. You're going to have financial challenges that you're working on. You're going to have business deals you're trying to close. You're going to have family members stressing you out and bring your energy down. You're going to have all of that's going to be there. So it's not about being perfect. What it's about is going through your gratitude list and then realizing because of that, those are the big things in your life. As long as you have those things functioning for yourself, then everything else is small. And then it puts you in a state of gratitude from that state forward. And then you can take on your day with a different energy level than it would if you just got up, listened to the radio, and then life hits you as it's going to happen. Now you're reacting to it, and then you're trying to get back and get anxiety with it, and that's a whole different energy. So with all that being said, I just want to give people that context again. If you're new to the show, that's what the question comes from. That's the purpose of it. It's not about being perfect. It's about choosing to be a 10 because of the gratitude list that you stated earlier. And when you're grateful for that, then the universe, to me, I believe, brings you other things to be grateful for as well. So now, with that being said, we're going through our gratitude list. We're going through our spiritual energy number, Reggie, and our state is high, vibrating high for our topic for today. So why don't you walk us into that?
Yeah, so what we're going to do today is actually, it is a follow-up on last week's conversation, and I'll just give a brief 30-second or maybe 60-second summary of that, where we looked at it, one particular developmental model, stages of adult development, which impact, specifically this model was assessing values. And what we're going to do today is take several of the levels of development from that model, which are color coded, and then you'll see listeners and listeners won't see that, but viewers will see it in a couple of minutes. And we're going to apply these levels of development to leadership, how people at different levels of development would lead, but also how it's necessary to lead if the people you're leading are at different levels of development. So it's two-pronged there. You can't just be a leader and know your own level of development, which is helpful by all means, but you also have to have a sense of who you're leading, because they can't follow you if you're not leading them from where they are in that moment. So that'll make more sense when we actually see it. So I'm going to share the screen in just a second, and it'll be helpful to have that up there, and we can actually take a look at it together. So just to kind of orient what people are looking at here. Again, this is based on developmental research. It's based on a model called spiral dynamics. This is really 4 of the 8 levels of development that we looked at last week. And these are the necessary ones for us to see now. Just to orient further, if we look from, I'm going to go from right to left, from red to blue to orange to green. We're looking at the red column being the earliest level of development. Blue is a later, more inclusive level. Orange is a even later, more inclusive level. Excuse me. And green is an even later, more inclusive level. So it's really, we're going from right to left in terms of increasingly more comprehensive and inclusive levels of development and therefore leadership style. Before I say anything else, I want to just give credit to, I studied this model for some years, but this particular chart that we're looking at was created by a colleague named Brett Thomas. And at a time when he was teaching in the Integral Leadership Collaborative, and he gave a bunch of us permission to use this. You can see on the bottom, it still has his copyright down there. But he created this particular chart using the levels of development. So just want to that's just to put it out there. I'll take a pause here. Anything you want to say or ask before I kind of jump into what this chart's actually telling us?
Well, I want to say, again, it's good that we continue to build on this. And I want to say I appreciate you setting the context from the onset that the leader has to understand where the people are that they're working with, because it's important, at least for me, to receive it, because I'm going to look at it through that lens.
Yeah.
Not that I'm saying I'm a leader with the arrogance of it, but I'm building a movement, and understanding where people are is great. So I'm looking forward to it. And I really like how it's laid out. And other than that, I'm listening.
Okay, great. So what I want to do is just take a look at, I'm going to go across all 4 columns and just take a look at the top row. So where it says worldview description. And again, I'm going to do this. I forget why he laid it out the way it is, from right to left in increasing development. But I'm going to go from right to left, red to green, basically. So the imperial worldview, I mean, that's based on the level of development that we spoke about last week, red, or right makes might. And so the way anybody operating in this worldview views the world is as a jungle, where the strongest survive, and you want to be the most powerful, and you want to win through strength. So that's the worldview of red. The traditional worldview, the blue column, looks at the world through an ordered existence. It's hierarchical, all right, and it's being controlled by a higher authority and the ultimate truth. And that exists in religions and nations. It's a way that's been very common for centuries, to really kind of rule or lead. And more often than not, in a traditional worldview, any given example of that believe that they have the one true truth. Moving further left to the orange column, the modern worldview is basically the scientific worldview, where if you do the work and you study and you do experiments and you get facts, the world can be a fairly level playing field, at least theoretically, where there's unlimited possibility, where you can win it all, but not by overpowering people or dominating them in a hierarchy, just by performing better, by using strategy, using fact, and doing a better job. So it's achievement oriented. That's the modern worldview. And again, each of these, it's important to say, is more complex and granular than just what I'm giving here in this first row of the worldview description, but just trying to capture how they're looking at things. Finally, and this is not the highest level of development, but these 4 are the common ones in the world today. That's why these are the 4 we're looking at. The postmodern worldview, this green column, looks at the world as a web of interrelationships, where humans and other lives depend on each other in this give and take of survival and well-being. So there's more respect for everything and everyone. And you don't want to win and achieve and just be at the top of the heap. You want to be a fair playing or good faith member of this web of life. And that's the postmodern worldview. And so the last thing I'm going to say now is I'm going to just scroll, down slightly to the next column where there's bold face print. And that's where they describe that they put a label on a type of leadership. I'm going to skip the next few columns and go down to where it says the appropriate leadership style. So in red, in the imperial worldview, you're an autocrat. Might makes right. You have the power. You're going to dominate people. It's an autocratic leadership. It's nothing like democracy or democratic leadership. In a traditional worldview where there's this pyramid of, this hierarchical structure, and you're at the top, you're an authoritarian leader, which is a little bit different than being autocratic. And we can get into that if we need to. In the modern worldview, the scientific achievement, strategic generated worldview, that's strategic leadership. Let's figure out the best way to do this. We're gonna beat the other companies or beat the other teams. Ours will be the best strategy, the most informed, the most factual, the most competent. It's performance based. And in the postmodern worldview, it's collaborative leadership. It's not just one person at the top. But it's all of us telling our stories, learning from each other, and leading in a more egalitarian or collaborative way. So I'm going to take a pause there and just see what's coming up for you, and then I can take a deeper dive and even give one really good example of why knowing whom you're leading is really important.
Well, I think it's a wonderful thing that you pointed out. What I like about it is, again, being a system engineer, I love frameworks, thinking frameworks, and finding a way to categorize and sort, and then particularly as it relates to human thought process and behaviors, is something I'm in that space. I'm in that interest, and that's, to me, is what interests me and what you're sharing with me here. I think that where you and I were disagreeing about last week was because I was looking at it from a context of human emergence and how do you get people to emerge at different levels of consciousness. And I believe that could be intentional. So I didn't understand the framework you were saying. And I get that you say it's much more to what you're just presenting here. And for me, everything comes down to looking at how you use assessments to measure that. Like for me, for example, and I'm just saying this is how I interpret it, but my understanding of looking at it here without the deeper understanding you bring to the framework is, and I'm just using this as an example, to me, Trump's worldview is the world's a jungle where the strongest and most cunning survive, gain power, and satisfy their desires. That to me is all the exhibiting and the actions he's exhibiting right now and the way he's operating. And people are seeing that now more so than ever before. And I thought he got elected, I believe he built his base from all the people who are, that MAGA masculine world, those podcasters, those folks who felt that manhood was being threatened by this woke ideology of not being clear on what genders or what and so forth. So man's going to lose his position of authority in the world. And so they looked at him as, and he ran on the brand of strategic leadership, modern view, worldview. And they believe that that's what they saw, that, might takes right in that context, and you can be aggressive and win. And I believe that's the base he built with those men who felt that way. And I believe that then you have the other individuals who identify as race within the MAGA movement, who now believe traditional worldview. The world is an ordered existence and under control of higher authority and ultimate truth. So they look at it from a context that that's the truth that he represents, that political party, that keeping the structure conservative locked in place of what we've had. Let's keep that works, even though I might not be benefiting from it, but I understand that structure of how that looks. And so I'm comfortable with that. I don't want to change that. So folks who are saying at least that's where they're going to get my vote and my interest. And the hope where you see none of that is over in the postmodern, from my perspective, with the whole conservative movement. Now, I don't even say that Democrats, they talk from, again, this is my assessment, not the framework's assessment. They talk from the postmodern worldview, but they behave in the modern worldview lens. And that's what I see they are. And they, again, can get people to rally around them by pointing out that Trump was in the imperial worldview perspective, but that doesn't guarantee them votes. And it doesn't motivate people and get people to rise up. So I'm just putting the lens through that process. I mean, the framework through that process as I process everything else in my life. So those are my comments.
Yeah, great. And so, I mean, I generally, everything you said, I agree with. I think that's a pretty accurate look at, what's being depicted on this chart. And just a quick comment on this. And I think I may have mentioned this last week, and I want to get into an example of how this can work in leadership in just a moment. But I want to take a kind of a wider lens for a moment. So the United States Constitution, which still appears as it was written in 1787, 1789, with the addition of some amendments, 27 amendments. The United States Constitution emerged through a modern worldview in response to a traditional and or imperial worldview. There was both traditional and imperial worldview back in the 1700s. So the idea of, even though we know the limitations of the Constitution, but that all men were created equal, that there would be a democratic process, that everybody has a shot at a good life. That's an early iteration of the modern worldview. So that's where the Constitution emerged through and came from. And your assessment of the Democratic Party, I think, is pretty accurate. That they sometimes skillfully, sometimes unskillfully perpetuate or speak about, espouse is the word I want, the postmodern worldview. And the postmodern worldview basically gave us the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the LGBTQ, et cetera, movement that came through postmodernism, because different subjugated groups looked at the modern worldview and the Constitution and the success, in quotation marks, of America, and basically said, yeah, that's just a European white man story. That's a crude way to say it, but that's effectively it. And they said, what about all these other stories, women and people of color and people who are not heterosexual, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the power on the planet right now, across the board, even though there are pockets of different types of power, the modern worldview pretty much controls the conversation on the planet. It has the guns and it has the money. Whether it's in a communist China, whether it's in a formerly democratic United States, whether it's in a democratic European Union, that's where the power exists on the planet. There are still plenty of people and institutions that have traditional values. There are still some people who operate through an imperial worldview. And there are people, trying to climb the ladder and bring more postmodern, the healthy version of postmodernism into the world. Because again, each of these worldviews is increasingly inclusive, comprehensive, balanced, and by definition, complex. I'll just say a little bit about that and then I'll give the example. Let's just refer to the imperial worldview as the place of kings and queens. Do what the king or the queen says or get beheaded. All right, that's kind of an extreme example. That's pretty simple. Do what you're told or die. All right. But if you move into a traditional worldview where there's these more complex stories and myths, where there's the myth of Christianity, and I don't mean to demean Christianity, but it is a myth, or the myth of America, or the myth of fill in the blank, it gets a little bit more unwieldy. You still might have a pope or a president, but it's not like if you disagree, you die. So that's more complex. If you move into the modern worldview and you have a democracy and you allow people to vote and you have all these different representatives in the government, trying to get things done becomes increasingly complex. Back in red, the king says it's true, it gets done. In a democracy, that works. You have branches of government, you have the judicial, you have the legislative, you have the executive, you have the different even in the legislative branch, the United States Congress, you have this bicameral, you have the Senate and the House, and then you have local, state, and federal levels of government. So it's much more complex to operate in a modern worldview, but it is much more potential to be fair. So I just wanted to throw that in. I'll give one example of this as a leadership process, and I'll be quiet. And unless you want to just jump in here before I do that.
Well, I want to break your train of thought. Yeah, I mean, I have comments. I can wait to the end, but I didn't want to break your train of thought.
Well, I'm good. I mean, I kind of know where I'm going next, so I won't lose it. So if you want to chime in here, by all means do.
Yeah. So the way you explain it now, I understand why you were adamant about making sure that there's no changing for 6 to 15 years. There's time to change these worldviews because of the other things you're laying on top of it now in the context. And I looked at it as just really defining individuals and their behaviors based within this lens and frameworks is how I was looking at it. from that perspective. And now, what's interesting about what you're saying now, as far as the things that make it complex to for the whole society to move to their worldview, and I look at it from this context. I think that again, most people are not getting this kind of education to be able to recognize that these worldviews exist and that there's an opportunity to think other ways instead of the way that you've been told to think only. And I give you an example of what I mean by that. That in the capitalistic system that we live in currently, it's prudent if you are that individual who makes it out of one of the marginalized communities because of your either your athletic ability, your talent singing wise, or your ability to act, and you're able to get out of a marginalized community and get welcome to the table of folks who are now generating capital, and they have the millions now to give them, someone like a Kevin Hart. But the understanding is this: they teach you that to be more financially prudent, you don't take that capital that you've given and go back and use it to help out your community. That's not smart. That's dumb. What you want to do is give it back to the construct and invest in the S&P and all these other things to leverage it, and we'll give you a return on your money so they keep working. But the question never comes back to him. If I already have $50 million and you're just telling me that if I follow your plan, I can have $150 million, how's my life going to be different? He's not critically thinking that way. He's just following, this has to be the way to do it. So if I give money back, I'm a fool and it's stupid. And if I lose any money along the way, even though you have all this money to lose, if you lost 49 million and spent the last $1 million to live out the rest of your life, you're not going to pretty much, once you're used to the lifestyle, you're not really living outside those parameters much unless, you stuck in buying consumerism. So my point I'm saying all that is that I just really love the way that it gives not only the separate columns of the frameworks, but then breaks down the far left column where it talks about what the constructive feedback look at. Like, for example, I look at the postmodern worldview, frame as your own subjective personal experience, allow time for them to share their feelings, focus on opportunity to enhance the we. Like, for me, that's really where I am in my thinking, and looking for individuals who think that way as well, and to build a tribe with those individuals for greater economy. So I'm enjoying what you're saying, but that was the reference I wanted to share, is how the worldviews for folks don't change, and people just don't understand they can be complicit in their own subjugation without understanding the frameworks.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great example. I mean, again, everything you just said, I generally agree with it. So one other thing came up in terms of how development works, whether it's this model or any model of development, which is important to at least say out loud. So two things. One is, when development is healthy, and again, we're talking about moving from, I'm just going to use the worldview language, from imperial to traditional to modern to postmodern. When it's healthy, we transcend, move beyond, but also include the previous worldview. So when I move from the imperial worldview to the traditional, and I'm living, I embody the traditional worldview now, I still have access to the ability to see the world as a jungle. Like, to know that I didn't forget about that. It's just not the primary driver in my life anymore. And that's true for any healthy development. When development is unhealthy, and I think that I'm living in a traditional worldview, but I'm still being driven by the imperial, basically what I've done is I basically have the imperial as shadow. I've transcended it and excluded it, and they believe it's not there anymore, and that's unhealthy. Now, I could go down a deeper rabbit hole with that, but I'm not gonna. The important language is healthy development transcends the current worldview and includes it as I move into the next, later level of development, and that's just really important. If you transcend and exclude it, it becomes shadow, and it's still going to be messing with you for the rest of your life. And that's literally true. And I can come back to that if we need to. But let's tell a story. This is a real story. Happened there's a leadership business that coaches, began as a CEO coaching company back around 2000. It's been in existence for a quarter of a century now. It's very good. I'm not going to name it because I don't want to misrepresent it in any way. And they use parts of this model that we're looking at, but they don't use it as development. They never use the word development. They don't talk about development. They have an integral perspective and they use development, but they never talk about it. And they represent these 4 autocratic, authoritarian, strategic, and collaborative leadership approaches as styles. You can see it right here on the page, right? Appropriate leadership style in that left-hand column. So when they get these, they began just coaching CEOs. They now coach other C-suite executives and mid-managers as well. But for some years, they were just a CEO coaching company. And they were very successful. People loved them. And they were mainly coaching mid-level corporations, and mainly in the middle of the country when they first got going. That they weren't on the, in California, New York, DC, or anything like that. They're in the middle of the country. Great success. But in their early days, one of the founders was in a family-owned company. I'm not going to even say where it was. And he tells this story. That's why and they're having some financial problems, that the business wasn't doing as well as it could have been doing. And they brought this man in as a consultant, which they don't really do consulting work anymore. You either take their training or you don't. They brought this man as a consultant, and he was speaking to them pretty much from a postmodern worldview, using the language of storytelling, getting their perspectives, emphasizing their own individual growth, acknowledging their individual perspectives, pointing to their individual abilities to grow within the company, and providing some feedback to them. And like he was getting, like, he would ask questions and nobody was responding, like zero response. So he knew he was in trouble. And this is a really bright, talented guy, but early in this process when they were building this leadership company. And the man who hired him, the CEO of the company, was a pretty smart guy. And again, it was a family-owned business. It had several hundred employees. It was pretty big, mid-level. And so they took a break and they had a meeting and just said, you have to understand something. This is a family-owned building, and they're accustomed to trusting the leadership, trusting me and the other executive officers, and they're the foreman in the factory, and they're accustomed to trusting us and being told what to do. When you start telling them about this, I'm just going to use my language now, this web of life and how we have to we're all equal and all that stuff, that's a foreign language to them. And you're not going to you can't reach them that way. And so that was a good lesson for them. So they went in for the second half or the next hour or whatever. And what this consultant did, because he had the ability to do this, he went in there and spoke through a traditional worldview. He addressed them through a traditional worldview, and they got it. He spoke to where the people in the room were. Now, he had the ability, because of who he was, what he studied, what he did for a living, to take that feedback and lead from the appropriate perspective. But he went in there, in some way unprepared, didn't realize who was in the room, and he was 2 developmental levels beyond where they could really hear him. So the ability to know my own level of development, and his level of development was actually not on this page. And I'll speak to that in a second. But also the level of development of to whom I'm speaking is really important when somebody.
Yeah. I'm sorry. There's no way I can add things on my end without it taking over the screen. Unfortunately, I was trying to have it added in the background so I had an opportunity to speak. Were you finished? I'm sorry, I can bring your screen.
Yeah, I just want to say one last piece there. So the person I'm speaking about, he operates. If you remember from last week, we spoke about there's the next level after this green level, it was yellow, which was called an integral level, and that's the first level that understands all the previous levels. That doesn't make so. On this chart that we're looking at, let's just use the colors. It's just quicker to say it this way. Each of the colors thinks the other ones are stupid, dumb, naive, woo-woo, pick out some insult. They just don't get the other styles or the other worldviews. They think that they're wrong. And the next developmental level was the first one in human history that we know of to be able to look at postmodernism, modernism, traditionalism, and imperialism and understand each of them for what it is at its best and when it emerged. And so he was able to realize that he had made a mistake in terms of the audience to whom he was speaking and shift from a collaborative tone to a more authoritarian tone. Now, a lot of people who live in the collaborative world think of authoritarian leadership as bad or wrong. And at its healthiest, it's not. Again, each one of these can be healthy or unhealthy. Autocracy nowadays is rarely healthy because the center of gravity on a planet is basically orange and modern. But there are healthy leaders who lead through the authoritarian, basically the pyramid or the triangle. The Pope would be one of them. He's the head of a big religion, and it's not a democracy, even though they do vote for the next Pope. When you're the Pope, you're not, you don't call everybody in, all the Catholics in and say, okay, what do you want to do? You lead, and that's what's expected from the faithful. But this is a Pope who, at the very least, has a postmodern center of gravity, and he might even be an integrally informed Pope, beyond the green into the yellow. So he's a talented individual. But he's leading in a traditional structure, and he has to be the authority based on the gospel of Jesus Christ as a leader of the Catholic world. So as we apply this in the real world, it gets really slippery, especially for people who lead huge organizations like the Catholic Church or the United States or the European Union, or pick one. And last piece about that is, the Prime Minister of China, Xi, I never know how to say his name. He's basically using all of the tools of modernism to run a communist country, a traditionally communist country, with some occasional autocratic rules because you get punished if you don't follow the rules. But he's really good at using modern tools. So again, I want to give this isn't like this linear, and in case anybody's hearing it for the first time, it's not this linear thing where you go from here to here to here to here and you're done, because all of these exist on the planet at the same time, and it can get very complex in terms of how they're used, for whom and by whom. So I'll put a pin in it there.
Yeah. And here's what I'm interpreting from this. So several things are coming to mind. First of all, the way you explain the Pope and the need for having authoritarian leadership and people not being able to receive that language if it's coming from the collaborative leadership perspective. So they need to be led in an authoritarian leadership way because that's what they're used to and that's what they have experienced. And they look at it as a sign of weakness if you bring that collaborative leadership language to it. And that's what the media has done. The media has now really set that stage in America. If you talk in collaborative leadership, you're woke, basically. And that's a problem. And you and I come from, and you and I have met through the bones of the collaborative leadership mindset from conscious capitalism. I mean, that's basically what they're advocating. That's where the 4 principles of conscious capitalism comes from. Number 1, have a higher purpose for your business. Number 2, stakeholder leadership, that all people have a say, and you must give them and think about their benefit and how they're going to benefit from your business model as well. Then conscious culture, which you want to make sure that it's a culture that is there for people to come into and it continues to grow. And that's how you're building. And then finally, the fourth principle of pretty much no egalitarianism. And that's when you're saying that we're not going to run anywhere near the authoritative leadership type of structure or strategic leadership. So that was really the principles of conscious capitalism, how I met Kemp and you through those bones. So I get both, right? And I get what you're saying, there's pluses and minuses. I look at it this way, and I'm even going to share this with you because you were telling me about the people who were teaching corporations. And this where this gentleman, I'm going to share the screen, my screen right now, John Maxwell. He must have been trained through that understanding, because this is how he came up with his 5 levels of leadership. And this is what the first thing I went back to this thinking when you talked about the leader has to understand where his people are, and then how you define yourself and look at yourself as a leader, right? So you look, again, the colors are similar. Red at the bottom position saying you have to. And then permission is where people now follow you because they want to, right? Where the have to is your boss, your supervisor, your position power. Permission is when people say, we elect this person because we like this person. Then the production becomes your leader because you able to convince others that through your own efforts and your drive and your discipline, they can follow you and results are going to happen. People follow you for that. Then fourth is people development, because you help them grow. And I think that, having these 5 levels like this in that context, that framework, you say, even though I get that from a worldview standpoint, those things that happen simultaneously, and then some people can't and not really able to relate to the messaging. But as a leader, and that's how I look at it, through that lens, you have to understand this as you grow. And then, of course, get to the point where your pinnacle, where your character, people follow you because of who you are, like a Nelson Mandela, someone like that, who just comes into the room, commands a different energy. And then quickly, I want to share my other screen to bring up, again, the Master Consciousness by the Maps of Consciousness by David Hawkins. And I want to share that because that's, again, a key indication of, I look at when people are not able to connect or receive that messaging, that's because they're vibrating at a different level. That's why I look at it. I look at energy as everything, and everything is energy. And so when people who are in that authoritative column, and when you spoke about the CEO who came with them a collaborative perspective and they couldn't understand that, I look at that. My interpretation is that goes back to the frequency. They're vibrating at a different level. And if you're speaking that neutrality, you're speaking acceptance, energy, and that's where you're at, and you're speaking that to people who are at the apathy, grief, fear, desire, anger, pride, they're not going to receive it. And they're not going to understand what you're saying. They're not going to agree with you either, even though it may make logical sense in your worldview. And I get what you're saying, that the different 4 structures look at each other worldview and say they're wrong and we're right in that context. But I just wanted to add this piece because, to me, I always want to go back to, as an engineer, how do I measure it? How do I look at and assess my actions, my behaviors, my thoughts, my overall performance, and not just my ego telling me I had a good day or I'm doing good, but what is the results? What does it look like? And having this map of consciousness, to me, really puts that in perspective of now within that framework, because now you can see how just the thought of pride, anger, you're vibrating that, how that now goes back to where that may align with someone who's in the traditional worldview thinking and processing. And so that's how I'm tying it together. So I just wanted to add that perspective to it.
Yeah, great. I mean, because there are so many things, to go step back from a really, really broad perspective. There are so many factors in play for us as human beings in the 21st century because of all of the myths and the research that we have access to now. The number of models and charts and approaches to understanding ourselves available can be mind numbing. I mean, there is so much out there. And so it's a blessing and a curse, because we understand now more than we did 100 years ago, obviously. But my bias and my experience has been that if you try to access all of them, which I don't, I did for probably about 10 years in my 40s and 50s. But just to, find what really resonates, what makes sense, where I can see evidence of really working in the world, and go from there. So what I just want to do is come back to this chart for a moment, because we're not going to go through the whole chart, but just want to go down the left-hand column, which is just to the left of the green there, because the chart is really useful in understanding, giving you a sample of how to communicate through all four worldviews and leadership styles, how to attempt to influence somebody, how to motivate somebody, how to provide feedback, all right, and how to provide positive feedback. So it gives, two different things there. So I think this is one example of how to begin to take a deep dive into one of the models. Because again, in this case, my colleague, who was actually my mentor in the business end of things for a few years, Brett Thomas, who created this. He created this chart, not the content of it, but he formulated the chart itself. So I just wanted to add that.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, and I feel you in that. And I look at it from a context that this is an excellent framework just to get understanding of how the world evolved historically over the years, and how the world and why the world is where it's at right now, and getting a better understanding. Because again, as I said before, as a system engineer, once you understand systems and I understand the construct for what it is, you don't allow yourself to get taking things personal, because I believe it all comes back to identity. And if your worldview and your identity is given to you, as you talk about, by your cultural givings, it tells you that based on that and your parents operating within their structured worldview in that context, and you believe that you're a Black boy growing up in this world and that you have to be twice as good as anyone else, particularly white people, that now becomes your brand. That's your conditioning, that process of thinking that way. So right before you can even process any incompetence, you have accept the victim mask. I'm a victim, and I have to move through life with a victim lens, and everybody's coming at me. Things are happening to me because of these things I've been told, and this is the reason why. And those stories are not necessarily true, but that's what the cultural giving was given. And now as a result, you have to function and move through that world. And then you begin to understand as you grow that you can be much more than that. You can be much more than just your race or your ethnicity or your religion or any of these things, context, sexual orientation. Because once you accept that as your identity, then someone like Trump can sit here and do the move such as attack the Pope. And then everybody who identifies with the Catholic Church is immediately triggered. And he knows that. And that's what he does. I mean, he said things all along to trigger people who are not Catholics. He's triggered Blacks. Well, we're going to take that all the Black woke stuff from the army. I mean, that's just his trigger in our minds. But yet and still, if you identify within the Black perspective. So Trump has done that cycle of just triggering people because people are so fixated on their identity that you're allowing someone now to manipulate you into being in an action in a state that you didn't necessarily have the intention to be in. And that's why I think it's important to understand these worldviews so that you can see firsthand and have critical thought process to think for yourself, how do I maneuver and live in life to be better for the group and build a tribe of people who are aligning with you. So you're not just around people who have these different worldviews and then trying to build with them on a collaborative leadership effort. That's going to fail. So being intentional about who you build with, who you spend your time with, people who don't identify with their race or any of these other construct, religion, all that, it's first and foremost. They be descriptions of who they are, but it shouldn't be your identity that you lean into and defend, that you can be triggered by what's going on in the world to take you away from your natural creative liberation self. So that's my closing perspective on it.
Yeah. I think that's I again, I agree with it. And I think it's in the best meaning of this word. And it's the reason I suggested we use this chart today and have this conversation. It's a useful perspective. And again, sometimes say something is useful, it sounds like, a shoelace is useful. So what? But it's useful. It's practical. It makes sense. You can do something with it in the day-to-day world. I think that's important. Last piece I want to say on this chart is if you look at the America of today, and you alluded to this in the first 15 minutes or so, I'm pretty sure. I just want to return to it and dig a little bit deeper. If we look at the Democratic Party today, if you drew a Venn diagram around the postmodern view and the modern view, so the intersection of the postmodern and modern, that's the center left. That's the Democratic Party. If you look at the Republican Party, prior to Trump, it was the Venn diagram of the modern and the traditional. Right? If you look at the Republican Party with Trump, it's the Venn diagram of modern, traditional, and imperial, because it's the leaderism and imperial worldview using the language and the structures of both tradition and modernity in order to get what he wants. And there are many people that go along with that. So it's the rise of the global oligarchs and autocrats, of which Trump is one. And we saw that Orban in Hungary lost over the weekend. But they have skewed, at least temporarily, the growth that we've seen over a period of decades, if not centuries. And for the survival of democratic process, we need these folks who are postmodern and modern and traditional to find the values upon which they agree, to form coalitions and stop the rise of autocracy. So I just wanted to tie it into the state of the world. And a lot of that is going on. It just doesn't get covered in the news. And occasionally it does. There are real journalists who do some real research and they write about it, but it doesn't make it above the fold, whether it's a legacy news organization, a TV station, whatever, because I think a lot of people don't even understand what we're talking about. But there are good people behind the scenes doing a lot of work here. As for the last 2 years in Hungary, that didn't just happen overnight. They were working on that victory for over 2 years in Hungary. So.
Yeah, but that's powerful what happened in Hungary, but it also goes back to point out where it also says that Hungary, people have a common enemy. So they can unite as Hungarians around what we feel is injustice to all of us, because he's an oligarch. He's taking all the resources from us, and we all equally impacted by it. And it still took years to get them organized enough to the point to get him out of office, because he's able to manipulate the judges, the courts, and brought that same framework here to America. And that's what Trump's done. But what's going to be more challenging for us is that, as I talked about before, the Democrats talk the postmodern worldview, but they behave in the modern worldview and traditional worldview as within the party. They're always going to have what they consider the people who want the progressive wing to be the leaders, but they're not going to allow the progressive people to be the leaders. So they're always going to have a what they call a centrist or a moderate at the very least being the leader, and the moderate is going to have that modern worldview. Exactly, moderate. Now I'm sure that's played off that, but that's what they're going to have. So they allow people to get into the party based off progressives running on the postmodern worldview, and that's what they say their policies to get the people excited behind. And see, they've done that so many times over the years where that message has now faded. Under Barack Obama, it was hope. They got everybody inspired. They got him elected twice, and they got people really thinking that the world was going to change. Then after that, we get Trump, and then show the world right there that we didn't change. And so now the people who are into that autocratic leadership, living and authoritarianship mindset are the ones who say, well, that's the world order we're used to. That's what we're going to fight. And now that's what we have in the world, is from my perspective. We have that. And people have to choose between, are we going to listen to the folks who's going to tell us, well, we're not going to be like Trump. We're not going to put us in a nuclear situation. We're not going to be at war with Iran, but we still may go into all these other countries and do what we've done in Libya and all that under Obama's administration. So our government still runs under a authoritative leadership type mindset, even regardless of what party's in office. And that's the hypocrisy I think people are expecting to change now. I think it's going to be what has to bring people together, is we can't just come back and just continue to saying, well, all you are representing is you're not Trump. Even though Trump is so far left so far gone now with his actions that may be enough to bring forth the 25th Amendment. But I wrap by just saying that my overall thought in closing remarks is this is a great framework. And to your point, it's one that can be learned from, still could be applicable. And I want to give you gratitude for sharing.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And so now we're going to move into, I say remove, because I was clicking remove it simultaneously, move into the last section of our show, which is to talk about you giving some way forward as we begin to wrap things up and how we can be more in line with becoming more fully human.
Yeah, so I mean, I'd love for people to begin studying some developmental models, but that's kind of a big ask. If everybody is so inclined, look at the work of Robert Keegan or Terry O'Fallon or Don Beck, who's no longer with us, and Claire Graves. But that's a big ask. But probably and by all means do that. But you can't just look at it like a chart and think, okay, I'm done. It takes some years to understand it, embody it, apply it, and then live it and see where you are. Be honest about where you are. Are you still controlled by an autocratic imperial impulse? Do you have a traditional view of the world? The most important piece is to be healthy where you are. I would take a healthy person with a traditional worldview any day over an unhealthy person with a modern worldview. In other words, any worldview can be healthy or unhealthy. So just because it's a later, more developed view doesn't mean it's better if it's unhealthy. So that's important. But you really get a sense of your own value system. Do you want to be told what to do? Do you want to be able to succeed on your own? Do you want to be in an egalitarian exchange with other people? And do you really see everybody as being equal and having dignity? Identify yourself. Don't make believe you are something that you're not. And then be healthy wherever you are. So that's kind of the best you can do with this, because it's complex, and you don't suddenly learn it and embody it overnight or in a weekend workshop or in a month. You have to spend some time and commit to it. So commit.
All right. Well, that's great. I think that we got to, have more shows. I think you really have to delve deeper into the healthy part, as you define healthy is not going to receive by other people as health until you really get into what the health looks like compared to unhealthy on that end, to make the rationalization that you've made. because I couldn't see the value. But I'm sure that, again, I don't understand the framework and the context as you do. And I'm looking to learn more. And so as we wrap up our show, and that's the purpose of it, folks, we are fully human. We're on a journey. We have a journey of discovery. And we learn in real time as we discuss things. And that's what the importance of the show. So thank you everyone who's watched the show, as whether it's live or you're watching the show as a recording. We appreciate it. Next Wednesday, 10 a.m., we're going to continue to discuss how to heal America's narratives. Thank you for watching.